You know, in my 42 years sitting on this bench, I thought I'd seen every shade of human nature. I really did. I've seen desperate fathers stealing baby formula, teenagers driving too fast because they thought they were invincible, and good people simply caught in bad moments. But that Tuesday morning in November, something walked into my courtroom that I had never encountered before. It wasn't just a crime, it was an attitude, a level of disrespect so profound that it chilled and silenced the entire room. Before I tell you exactly what happened, and believe me, you're going to want to hear this. If you believe that justice should be blind, whether you're a prince or a pauper, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps us share these important lessons about integrity with the world. Now let me tell you about Victor Hale. I got to court early that morning around 8:15 a.m., just like I always do. My father, Antonio Russo, he was a milkman who came to this country with nothing but a dream and calloused hands. He taught me something that's etched into my soul. He used to say, "Daniel, money screams, but character whispers. Never let the noise of a man's wallet drown out the truth of his heart." So there I was, sipping the espresso my clerk Laura made for me, looking over the docket, and there it was, right at the top of the list, the city versus Victor Hale. Victor Hale wasn't just a wealthy man. He was a billionaire real estate mogul. He owned half the skyline in Providence. But he was known for more than just his buildings. He was known for his temper, his ruthless evictions of elderly tenants, and his belief that the city's laws were merely suggestions for people like him. Laura walked over to my bench. I've worked with her for 2 decades, and I know when she's uneasy. She didn't just look worried, she looked rattled. She whispered to me that it was a circus out there. She said she had never seen so many cameras, and that Mr. Hale's security team was practically pushing people out of their seats. I looked out at the courtroom monitor. She was right. The gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. There were reporters from every major network, local citizens who had heard the rumors, and a sea of lawyers in suits that cost more than most people's cars. But what caught my eye were the regular people squeezed into the back rows, the tenants he'd evicted, the workers he'd stiffed. They were watching, waiting to see if the system would finally work for them. At 9 a.m., my bailiff announced that court was in session. The room went quiet, but it was a tense silence like the air before a thunderstorm. I purposely didn't call Hale's case first. I wanted to establish the tone of this courtroom. It's a place of respect, not a boardroom where he could snap his fingers. The first case was Mrs. Eleanor Vance. She was 78 years old, a retired librarian who walked with a cane. She stood before me, trembling slightly, holding a ticket for parking in a loading zone. She told me she was picking up her heart medication. She explained that the pharmacy lot was full, she couldn't walk far, and she was only gone for 3 minutes. I looked at her record, clean for 50 years. I looked at her face, honest, scared, respectful. I saw my own grandmother in her eyes. I told her she didn't have to be afraid here. I told her I saw a woman who has served her community for decades. Just as I was about to dismiss her ticket, the courtroom doors banged open loudly. He didn't just walk in, he invaded the space. Victor Hale strode down the center aisle, talking loudly on his cell phone, flanked by 3 lawyers. He was wearing sunglasses indoors. He ignored the bailiff, ignored the silence, and ignored the fact that an elderly woman was standing before the bench. He was booming into his phone, shouting about buying the whole block and crushing anyone who refused to sell. The disrespect was palpable, almost suffocating. He stopped right behind Mrs. Vance, looked at her cane, and let out an impatient sigh, checking his diamond-encrusted watch. He shouted toward the bench, asking if we were going to do this any time soon. He said his time was worth $10,000 a minute and told me to wrap up this little charity show. Mrs. Vance shrank back, terrified. The honest police officers in the room stiffened. I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest, the same anger I felt when I saw Chief Dalton smirk at a struggling mother, but I kept my face calm. I took a slow breath. I thought about my father. "Daniel, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late." Well, Mr. Hale was late to learn a lesson about respect, and class was about to begin. I looked at Victor Hale. He was tapping his foot, checking his watch again, radiating an energy that sucked the air out of the room. He wasn't just impatient, he was offended that he had to breathe the same air as the rest of us. "Mr. Hale," I said, keeping my voice low and steady. "In this courtroom we do not shout. We do not wear sunglasses, and we certainly do not interrupt the proceedings. You will wait your turn just like everyone else." He laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that echoed off the wood paneling. He took off his sunglasses slowly, revealing eyes that held absolutely no warmth. "Wait my turn?" he asked, looking around at the packed gallery with a sneer. "Judge, do you know how much money I lose just standing here? I don't wait for traffic lights, I don't wait for tables at restaurants, and I certainly don't wait for a $70 parking ticket case to wrap up." He turned his gaze to Mrs. Vance. She was still standing there, clutching her cane, looking like she wanted to disappear into the floor. She wasn't just afraid, she was humiliated. "Look, lady," Hale barked at her. "How much is the fine? $50? A 100 red?" Before I could bang my gavel, before the bailiff could step forward, Hale reached into the inner pocket of his tailored Italian suit. He pulled out a thick roll of $100 bills, held together by a gold money clip. "This is what this is about, right? Money," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. He peeled off 5 or 6 bills, crumbling them in his fist. Then he did something that made the entire courtroom gasp. He didn't hand the money to the clerk. He didn't hand it to Mrs. Vance. He threw it. He tossed the crumpled ball of cash at Mrs. Vance's feet. The bills scattered across the floor, landing near her orthopedic shoes. "There's $500, Hale announced, dusting off his hands as if he had just touched something dirty. "That covers your fine and buys you a new cane. Now move. You're in my way." The silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. It was the kind of silence that happens when a line has been crossed that can never be uncrossed. Mrs. Vance looked down at the money, then up at me, her eyes filling with tears of shame. She started to bend down, her old knees shaking to pick up the cash. "Mrs. Vance, stop," I ordered firmly. "Do not touch that money." She froze, straightening up slowly. I turned my eyes to Victor Hale. He was smiling. He actually thought he had solved the problem. He thought he had been generous. "Mr. Hale," I said, and my voice was shaking now, not from fear, but from a rage I was struggling to control. "You seem to think that because you have a heavy wallet, you have the right to trample on people's dignity. You think you can buy your way out of decency?" He shrugged, leaning against the defense table. "Everyone has a price, Judge. I just paid hers. Now can we get to my case? I have a helicopter waiting." I stood up from my chair. I wanted him to see me standing. I wanted him to understand that the authority in this room didn't come from a bank account. It came from the law, and it came from the respect we showed to one another. "Mr. Hale," I said, pointing a finger at the scattered bills on the floor, "you are going to pick up that money, every single bill, and you are going to apologize to this woman." He looked at me like I had spoken in a foreign language. He looked at the floor, then back at me. "I don't pick up change, Judge," he sneered, "and I don't apologize to people who waste my time. You want the money, you pick it up, or let the janitor do it. That's what you pay them for, right?" The bailiff stepped forward, his hand on his belt. The tension in the room was electric. Hale's lawyers were whispering frantically to him, probably telling him to shut up, to do what I said. But his arrogance was a wall they couldn't break through. He crossed his arms, challenging me. "Go ahead, Judge. Cite me for contempt. Fine me $1,000. Fine me $10,000. I'll write the check right now, but I am not bending down for anyone." I looked at Mrs. Vance, who was wiping tears from her cheeks. I looked at the crowd who were watching with bated breath, waiting to see if the billionaire would win again, just like men like him always seem to do. I sat back down slowly. I realized that a fine wouldn't hurt this man. Jail time for contempt would just be a story he'd tell at cocktail parties. He needed a lesson that money couldn't fix. "Mr. Hale," I said softly, "you think you know the value of everything, but you know the value of nothing. You think that money on the floor is power? No, that money is evidence." "Evidence," he scoffed. "Of what? Being rich? Evidence of disorderly conduct, creating a public disturbance and harassment of an elderly person. I listed, but more than that, Mr. Hale, you are here today for a zoning violation regarding your new skyscraper, correct?" He nodded, looking bored. "Yeah, a minor structural issue, just a signature, Judge." I opened his file. I looked at the photos of his building project. Then I looked at the photos Mrs. Vance had brought of the pharmacy parking lot. And suddenly, with a sharp clarity, I knew exactly what I had to do. I closed the file. The sound was loud in the quiet room. "Mr. Hale," I said, "since you refused to pick up the money you threw at a citizen of this city, and since you refuse to show even a shred of human decency, I am going to make a ruling that you cannot write a check to solve." Hale's smile faltered for the first time. His lawyer stopped whispering and looked at me with genuine fear. They knew the law, but they also knew that a judge has wide discretion when it comes to sentencing for behavioral issues in court. "You want to leave my courtroom?" I asked him. "You want to get to your helicopter? Fine, but you aren't leaving as a billionaire. Today, you are going to learn what it feels like to be the person you just humiliated." I turned to the bailiff officer. "Please escort Mrs. Vance to the clerk's office and make sure her fine is dismissed and leave that money on the floor. It's about to become part of the lesson." Hale took a step forward, his face flushing red. "What are you talking about? What lesson? You can't do this. I have the mayor on speed dial." "You can call the president for all I care," I told him. "In this room, you answer to me, and I have just decided that your money is no longer valid currency here." I picked up my gavel. The wood felt heavy and cool in my hand. I looked Hale in the eye, and for the first time since he walked in, I saw a flicker of doubt behind those sunglasses. "Victor Hale," I announced, "for your disrespect to this court and to Mrs. Vance, I am holding you in direct contempt, but you won't be going to a holding cell. Not yet." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You mentioned earlier that your time is worth $10,000 a minute. Well, I'm about to make you spend that time in a way you never imagined." Hale's lead lawyer, Mr. Carter, practically leaped in front of the bench. He was sweating now, his expensive suit suddenly looking very uncomfortable. "Your Honor," he stammered, his voice cracking, "my client apologizes for his outburst. We are prepared to pay the maximum fine for contempt immediately. There is no need for drastic measures." I looked at Carter, then back at Hale. The billionaire was still fuming, his jaw clenched tight. He didn't look sorry. He looked inconvenienced. "Mr. Carter," I said calmly, "you can put your checkbook away. The currency of this courtroom is respect, and your client is currently bankrupt." I turned my attention back to the gallery. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on Victor Hale. "Mr. Hale," I continued, "you said earlier that you simply crush people who get in your way. You treat this city like a monopoly board. Well, today you landed on the wrong square." I leaned forward. "My ruling is this. You are not leaving this courtroom until you hear the cases of the people sitting in the back row." Hale blinked. "What? Who?" "I don't know those people." "Exactly," I replied. "You don't know them, but they certainly know you." I pointed to the back of the room. I saw them when I walked in. Former tenants, small business owners, construction workers, people who live in the shadow of your skyscrapers. For the next 4 hours, I announced you were going to sit in that chair. You are not going to speak. You are not going to look at your phone. You are going to listen. Hale's face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "You can't be serious. I have a board meeting at noon. I have a merger to finalize. You are holding me hostage. I am holding you accountable," I corrected him. "And if you attempt to leave that chair before I dismiss you, you will spend the next 30 days in the county jail. And let me assure you, the accommodations there are not what you are used to." I signaled to the bailiff. "Officer, take Mr. Hale's phone and his sunglasses. If he wants to see justice, he needs to look it in the eye." The bailiff stepped forward. Hale hesitated, looking at his security team. For a split second, I thought he might actually try to resist physically, but he saw the hands of 3 officers resting on their belts. With a growl of frustration, he handed over his phone and ripped the sunglasses off his face. He slammed himself down into the defendant's chair, crossing his arms like a petulant child. "Good," I said. "Now let's begin." I looked out at the gallery. I knew exactly who to call first. There was a man sitting in the 3rd row wearing a faded work uniform with his name, David, stitched on the pocket. He had been waiting quietly all morning, clutching a thick envelope of documents. "Sir," I called out, "please step forward, state your name for the record." The man walked up to the podium. He looked tired. His hands were rough, covered in calluses and small scars from years of manual labor. He wouldn't look at Hale. He looked only at me. "My name is David Cole, Your Honor," he said, his voice raspy. "I own well. I used to own Cole Contracting." I saw Hale roll his eyes. He sighed loudly, making sure everyone heard his boredom. "Mr. Hale," I warned, One more sound and we add a night in jail to your sentence. Keep listening, Mr. Cole. Please continue, I said gently. Tell us why you're here today. David took a deep breath. He gripped the sides of the podium until his knuckles turned white. I'm here because of a speeding ticket, Judge. I was doing 45 in a 30 zone. I was rushing to get to a job site because if I was late, I'd lose the contract, and I couldn't afford to lose another one. I nodded. And why was that contract so important? Mr. Cole. David turned slowly. For the first time, he looked directly at the billionaire sitting a few feet away. Because 6 months ago, my company finished the drywall work on the Hale Heights luxury tower. It was the biggest job we ever landed. We worked weekends, we worked holidays. I paid my guys overtime out of my own pocket because Mr. Hale's team said the deadline was tight. Hale stared back, his face blank, unreadable. We finished on time, David continued, his voice trembling. The invoice was for $85,000. It's not much to him, but to me, that's my payroll. That's my mortgage. That's my kid's tuition. And what happened when you submitted the invoice? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. David pulled a crumpled letter out of his envelope. They sent me this, David said. A letter from his lawyers. It says the work was substandard and they refused to pay. They said if I wanted the money, I'd have to sue them. David wiped a hand across his eyes. Judge, I can't afford a lawyer like his. He knows that. He knows I can't fight him in court, so I had to lay off 3 of my best guys last week. I'm driving a truck with bad brakes because I can't fix them, and I was speeding because I'm terrified of losing my house. The courtroom was silent. I looked at Hale. He wasn't rolling his eyes anymore. He was staring at the table, picking at a loose thread on his cuff. Mr. Hale, I said, breaking the silence. Do you recognize this man? Hale cleared his throat. I don't handle vendor payments personally. My accounting department handles that. You don't handle payments, I repeated. But you certainly handle the profits, don't you? You live in the penthouse of that tower, do you not? He didn't answer. You sleep under the roof that this man built, I said, my voice rising. You walk past the walls, his hands put up, and yet you felt comfortable letting him lose his livelihood so you could keep a fraction of a percent more profit. It's just business, Hale muttered, though his voice lacked its usual power. No, I said sharply. Business is an exchange of value. This is theft. You stole this man's labor. You stole his peace of mind. And today you are sitting there because you tried to steal Mrs. Vance's dignity too. I turned back to David. Mr. Cole, I am dismissing your speeding ticket, but we are not done yet. I looked at the stack of files on my desk. I picked up the folder for Hale's zoning violation, the reason he was actually here today. Mr. Hale, your lawyers are here for a zoning permit for the new West Side development. Correct. A project worth, I assume, millions. Hale nodded slowly, a look of suspicion crossing his face. Yes, we need the city's approval to break ground next week. Well, I said, opening the file, I'm looking at the requirements for approval. One of them is demonstrated good standing with community relations. I closed the file again. I am not sure you are in good standing, Mr. Hale. In fact, looking at Mr. Cole here and looking at the other people waiting in the back, I'd say your standing is collapsing. Hale sat up straight. You can't deny that permit. The investors will pull out. It will cost me millions. Then I suggest, I said, leaning back in my chair, that you start listening very carefully to the next person I call, because your permit depends entirely on what I hear in this courtroom today. I scanned the gallery again. Next I called out. A young woman stood up. She was holding a baby in her arms. She looked terrified, but she walked forward. Hale looked at her, and for the first time I saw a bead of sweat roll down the billionaire's temple. He was beginning to realize that his money wasn't the most powerful thing in the room anymore. The truth was, the young woman adjusted the baby on her hip. She looked exhausted, wearing a coat that looked too thin for the November chill outside. She stepped up to the microphone, her eyes darting nervously toward Victor Hale, then quickly away as if looking at him might burn her. State your name, I said gently. Lily Parker, she whispered. I asked her to speak up so the court could hear her. She took a breath, patted the baby's back, and started again, her voice gaining a little more strength. My name is Lily Parker. I lived in the Hale Arms apartment complex on 4th Street, apartment 2B. I saw Hale stiffen in his chair. He knew the building. Everyone in Providence knew the building. It was a historic structure that he had recently purchased and was in the process of renovating into high-end luxury condos. "Miss Parker," I asked, "why are you here today?" She pulled a piece of paper from her pocket. It was pink, an eviction notice. "I'm here to contest this," she said. "I received this 3 days ago. It says I have to vacate within 48 hours because the building is being condemned for emergency structural repairs." She looked at Hale, tears welling up in her eyes. "But it's a lie. The building is fine. He just wants us out so he can start construction on the condos. I have a 6-month-old baby. We have nowhere to go. All the shelters are full because of the cold snap." I looked at Hale. He was shaking his head, looking at the ceiling, mouthing the word unbelievable. "Mr. Hale," I said, "is this true? Are you evicting tenants with 48 hours' notice?" He leaned forward, speaking into the microphone on the defendant's table. His tone was dismissive, like he was explaining simple math to a child. "Judge, the building is old. My engineers found issues, liability issues. If a pipe bursts or a ceiling cracks, who gets sued? Me. I'm doing them a favor. It's a safety precaution." "A safety precaution," I repeated. "Leaving a mother and an infant on the street in November is a safety precaution. It's standard procedure." Hale shrugged. "We offered them their security deposits back." "Once they move out," Lily interrupted, her voice shaking with anger now. "You cut the heat," she shouted. 2 weeks ago you turned off the boiler. You said it was broken, but the maintenance man told me he was ordered not to fix it. You're trying to freeze us out." Hale slammed his hand on the table. "That is slander. I never gave such an order. My management company handles maintenance. I don't get involved in fixing boilers." The room was buzzing. Now this wasn't just a business dispute anymore. It was cruelty. I looked over at David Cole, the contractor from the previous case, who was still standing by the side of the room. He had mentioned working on Hale's properties. "Mr. Cole," I called out, "you said you did drywall work for Mr. Hale. Did you ever do maintenance work at the Hale Arms?" David Cole stepped back to the podium. He looked at Lily, then at the baby. He took off his baseball cap, twisting it in his hands. "Yes, Your Honor," David said quietly. "I was there last month." And I asked, "What about the boiler?" David took a deep breath. He looked at Hale, who was glaring at him with eyes that promised retribution. But David didn't back down. Maybe it was because he had already lost everything. Or maybe he just couldn't stand to see a mother lied to. "The boiler wasn't broken, Your Honor," David said clearly. "It was working fine. The site supervisor told me to disconnect the intake valve. He said, 'Mister, and while you are in a cell, your financing will expire and your empire will crumble.' So, Mr. Hale," I stepped down from the bench, walking toward him. "Are you coming with me or are you going with the bailiff?" The drive to the Hale Arms was the longest 20 minutes of Victor Hale's life.